I've said this on occasion, but I never intended to become a YouTuber. It's sort of a happy accident, one that I'm very, very grateful for, but what I always wanted to be was a writer. Is that true? I never just wanted to be a writer. I wanted to make movies, which then makes this the story of how I wrote 12 books, more or less gave up on that dream, at least publicly. Everything went off the rails, and what I'm hoping to do from here. I started actually writing books with the intention of, publishing them in 2010. I'd signed up to move to West Africa and was gonna go via South Africa, and there was just that part of me that thought, I gotta start, because for my entire life, I'd always been thinking of stories. I wrote my first play when I was in like first grade, and the stuff that would end up becoming what I'm working with now, like what these books are working with, I think came about in high school. But even before that, I did all the stuff I think anybody does, which is, sit, look out the window as you're driving along, listening to music, and imagining that you're a ninja running across the rooftops. Whatever it was, like my imagination's always been fairly active, fairly visual, and fairly tied to music. But when I moved to South Africa, I finished this book, White Shores, was my very first book. And it definitely shows for a lot of reasons. When I finished it, it was a really, really big and important moment for myself. I'd never finished anything that big, that substantial. And I was very proud of myself, and I was very proud of the work. And I shared it with some friends, most of which who never responded to my request for them to read it, but a couple did. And of the ones that did, there was a guy living with me in South Africa. I was volunteering with an organization, which we can talk about another time, but he read it and loved it, had some great notes, but his passion for it, his excitement for it, only tripled my own and set me on a path that, I've never gotten fully off of. Although we'll get to that. I made a decision that year that I was gonna go ahead and continue to write and self-publish a book every year for the next 10 years. My goal is to basically publish around 1 million words, and I figured that by the end of that process, I would hopefully be at least a decent writer, if not a great one. And there's definitely a progression through these books of my skill, storytelling ability, all of that. And it was a very worthy experience, but it is one that is riddled with struggle, and one that unfortunately was started by the thought that, oh, if I do this, maybe I can make some money. Maybe this can become my thing. And the amount of pressure that I put on it as a result would lead to some of the struggles that I fell into down the line. This first trilogy I wrote during my first stint in West Africa, so over the course of about 2.5 years. I wrote this shorter novel, Dark Horse, in the Congo, and then I wrote Into the Nantin, the series, along with the book that goes between them, Shadows of the High Rage, when I came back to the States and was working as a consultant. So I was on the road all the time, and I would find time to write in airports, on airplanes, anywhere I could, just to keep the project alive. I also forgot to talk about this one. This is one of the books. I've written 12, so I published 9, you can see here. This one's actually the only one that's still available, Sea of the Unknown, and it's the only one that's not fiction, and it's about the story of how I got here. This guy I wrote the first time I lived in Paris in 2012, 2013. It is actually a handwritten book on the history of magic in my world, which is pretty fun. This is what I would work on when my English classes wouldn't show up, which happened fairly often. I would commute an hour and a half outside of Paris to go to a place called Sarcelles, and then sit in a high school that could never schedule me properly, and so I would work on my books. And I think that's kind of the point, is it's like when I was working on Into the Nantin, for example, I put everything that I had into it, like all the money that I made, all the air miles, all the hotel points, whatever. I traveled around the country and even went to conventions and met as many publishers as I could, as many potential fans. I put a ton of work and effort into the art, into presenting it, into trying to make it a thing. So this is my trial run of my table. Dark Horse gets a little section here, and then the rest is Into the Nantin. And in the end, I think I actually focused a little bit too hard on the making a thing out of it, and not just focusing on making the work itself as good as it could be. And as I got to the point that I was publishing Into the Nantin, launching Kickstarters to try and keep it alive, I was not accepting the reality that it just wasn't moving the way that I needed it to, and I was overspending everything I had to make the, like, when they talked about vanity publishing back in the day? Self-publishing used to be referred to that way because you would have something you wrote that was garbage, nobody wanted it, and then you would force it into existence and end up spending a ton of money on a stack of books that would just line your garage for the next decade. This is pretty close to that, if not that. Thankfully, I don't have a whole, stack of these books lying around somewhere. I do have some extras, but I was blind to the fact that it wasn't necessarily going anywhere. And while this universe, the stories that I'm telling in these books, are ultimately my North Star, like this is what I want to do more than anything. I would love to make these into movies, TV, books, whatever form they need to take, manga, I don't really care. I have huge ambitions and a huge desire to make it happen, but it's not easy. When I first moved back to Paris in 2017, so I lived here before in 2012, but when I moved back, I was vlogging every day. And I was still writing a book. I'd just written one for a publisher that got rejected, and I was writing another one for the same publisher that would also ultimately get rejected. This is actually one of the reasons that I know all the coffee shops in Paris, because I was always looking for one that would let me sit and work, like on my laptop, which was very rare back then and remains pretty rare in the specialty coffee club, unfortunately. Back in Black being one of the good ones where you can sit and work almost for however long you want to. Ooh. Anyways, eventually I had to make a change. Like, I couldn't keep writing and vlogging and not making any money and stressing and struggling and just fighting to survive. Something really had to change. So I quit writing, at least temporarily. Like, I didn't end up really quitting it entirely. I still wrote Sea of the Unknown, the story of how I got here, because I thought, there are gonna be some people that are interested in hearing this story. It felt like a real reality check. And in many ways, it was a really good one because I actually was fortunate to still be able to become a full-time creative. The creator life that I always wanted was available to me, and I took it. And that's kind of the story that you probably know or you're more familiar with, is the one where I focused on vlogging for a couple of years, burned out really hard, and then tried to navigate through what does it mean to be a YouTuber? Because I never really intended to become one in the first place. In fact, it's been one of the most enriching projects that I've ever undertaken, has been the sharing of my life through YouTube. But at the same time, telling the stories that have been banging around in my head, I mean, they're still there. Whenever I'm standing in the shower, listening to music, whenever I'm on a train, metro, wherever it is I'm going, so often my imagination, my thoughts, my dreams take a turn and go right back to where they've always been, which is with these stories. And so that raises the question, well then, how do I get back to telling those stories? How do I get back to the dream? Side note, these books all do exist in the same universe except for Sea of the Unknown. We can get that out of here. But the Oracle of the Dread Gods is the overarching series title for all of these books. I'm not scared to share them, and I'm not gonna hold off forever. Like, these will see the light of day. And I think that I've proved that I'm willing to put them out there. I just want to do it as close to right as I possibly can. And so I do have a plan forward that gets fuzzy the farther out you go, as they usually do. But I have a huge dream of actually completing these, at least getting it off to a very significant start in my lifetime, if not coming to some level of completion while I still exist, which time is ticking. So the plan is pretty straightforward, if a little bit ambitious and probably borderline impossible. But hey, what's life if we don't have impossible dreams that we don't know how to get to? I'm gonna take Dark Horse, the book that's like, I think it was like my 4th book that I wrote, and I'm going to redo it because I know exactly how I need to make it stronger, how I need to improve the story, how there's a lot of work to do on it, but Richard and I have talked about it a fair amount, and I know what I need to do to make it a stronger book. That's gonna be probably the first book that we re-release. But the way that we re-release it is gonna be something that helps us to work on our production chops, to see, do we have what it takes to do more than just write books? I made a video about this a while back that I can link to, but the dream sequence from that book is one that is written beat for beat to the song Cosmic Love by Florence and the Machine.
Because I think that before we get into it, it's good to have a couple images in your head so I don't have to try and describe everything.
And I think it would make a great music video just on its own, a standalone thing. So what we do is we license the song, we put together the production that we need to do, and we create that music video and release it as a book trailer for that book when we release the book. Then we can see, how does it do? Do we sell a whole bunch of books? Does the video do pretty well? Like, how do things go? And through that process, we'll also learn a ton. By producing like a really high quality level of production on something like that, which is definitely a step above anything that I've ever done myself, it's a small step towards making movies, but it's, I think, a very realistic way of gauging where we are and how much we really do have to learn. And there are probably some smaller projects that we can do before then, but I do think that as a midterm goal, it's a pretty good one. I recognize the irony of saying this in front of like an actual film set that's being put together behind me here, but I never really fully trusted the traditional Hollywood system to get done what I wanted to get done for a long list of reasons. And I mean, at this point, who knows what the future of the industry even looks like? Everything's been thrown into total turmoil over the last decade or longer, and I don't know what the future of it is. So the core of the plan right now really is to stop and make sure that everything fits together. Because as you've noticed and may have figured out from the fact that I've written 12 books at this point. There's like 50 or 60 that need to be written. And whether those get written as actual full books or they get turned into movies or TV shows or whatever they might end up being, the plan for now in the next 3 to 5 years, hopefully 3, but maybe 5, is to write the skeleton of all of it, to put everything in there, not like write everything, but to make sure that there's an actual plan and that things stick together. I had a book banging around in my head for the last year or so that I really, really wanted to write. And I did something that I've never done before, which was to synopsize it. Decided I'm gonna sit down, just write out all the beats of this story, make sure that it all holds together. And it was such a satisfying process. I immediately thought, I've got to write this book. And I started for like 5 seconds and realized, whoa, I've already written enough of these. Like, let's take a moment, just take a moment and think about this. What I realized what I could do is synopsize every book that I have written, along with all the ones that I have yet to write, and put together one great big tome of synopses. And by doing so, and reading that front to back, editing, it's gonna be a lot of work, but by editing that together and making sure that everything fits together, we will actually be sure, hopefully, as sure as we can be, that the whole thing works, and that the overarching conflict, the story that I wanna tell over the course of all these stories, works. Because like, whether it's a standalone story or like a trilogy or a series, I want them all to be consumable and enjoyable by themselves. You can just watch that, read that, whatever, and it's done and it's good. However, if you're into it and you're enjoying all of it, I would like you to be able to read and enjoy and see the whole thing get revealed over time in a really satisfying way. And the only way that I'm gonna make sure that it ends up being satisfying is if we do the work in advance to make sure we know what the ending is and how we're gonna get there. So that's the project. That takes me the next 3 to 5 years, and hopefully, as we get close to finishing that one, we're also ready to put the Dark Horse trailer together and release that and see how it goes. Maybe the plan changes by then, I don't know, but that's where we're headed right now. Which is why the YouTubing and Paris in My Pocket are actually really important and make, like, I can explain that. Which brings me nicely to thanking today's patron producer, Ariyara, and all my patrons. When I say for making it possible, I don't just mean for making this possible, the day-to-day, which is very true. My patrons make all of this possible. Like my life, again, they are the backbone to everything I do, and without them, things would have been much, much, much harder than they already have been, and things have been pretty hard for a long time. But in reality, they're also a part of what I'm trying to build for the future. Something that I haven't done the best job sharing, and I've been trying to figure out how to, because there are some jumps that have to get made to getting to that big vision of making like blockbuster motion pictures. It's not something that's just gonna happen on its own overnight. It's something that I'm gonna have to really work for the next 5, 10, 20 years. You can see now why like building a business like Paris in My Pocket could be so important, right? Because the real goal there is to make something that can support me, that can, at a minimum, support a lifestyle that enables me to spend more time writing, planning, and eventually, you know, producing these things, even if that means that I can't do much more than invest in myself. But hopefully we make enough money, we find a way to make enough profit that we can reinvest that into the art. Because that's all I really want to do in life. Like, you can't take the money with you when you die, right? And if I could take all the money that I could ever make and reinvest that into art, into music, into making movies, into making this like cinematic universe come to reality. I mean, that's the only reason I want to make. I'm not very money motivated, but that motivates me. Creating that motivates me. And then hopefully I at least get it out of my skull before I die and, you know, can share it with you guys. And I hope that also helps you to understand why this middle ground of like maintaining my YouTube presence, my vlog, and then building up the Paris in My Pocket side all ultimately makes sense, because the future could be YouTube. Like, we could make and distribute movies on YouTube and in its entirety. There's so many possibilities, so much cool stuff that is becoming available to all of us as YouTube takes the #1 spot of all the streamers, and as just the world changes. There's a lot of big and scary and uncertain things going on, but there's also some potential for some really cool and fun stuff. So if I can figure out a way of navigating the next few years, of building this business that at a minimum, like I said, supports me, I have the stuff in my brain to create. Now I just need the resources to do it. Cooper's happy with sticks. As long as there are enough sticks in the world, he's good to go. So in the end, I've picked a really difficult road for myself, but it is the only road that I've ever wanted to travel. And it's been very twisty and twervy so far. I don't know how I'm gonna get there. I would never have guessed that I'd be here right now with you talking about it the way that I am, that I'd be building something like Paris in My Pocket. But I don't have a backup plan. Like, I have no safety net. I've been feeling that a lot this summer. This summer's been really challenging, and I definitely been feeling the stress of like having nowhere else to turn. But at the end of the day, the hope is that having nowhere else to turn, having no parachute to pull, actually leads to the results that we're looking for, right? Like, it's do or die. And I'm grateful to have you. I'm very grateful that you're here watching, even if you're just here for the ride. I hope that the stories that I get to tell, whether through my life or through the pen and later the silver screen, end up being ones that bring you some real joy, solace, food for thought down the road. And if nothing else, I just hope you're here for the ride and to see where we go. And of course, if you want to be a part of it, like at the core of it, a central piece of it, you could always join these lovely people scrolling on the screen right now, my delightful patrons. Well, I guess you could say have been investors in that future for a very long time now, and it will continue to be a very central part of the support structure that keeps me alive at a minimum. And hopefully get to be a part of something really big that we all get to be very proud of together in the not so distant future. Hopefully not too long, huh, Cooper?